Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi everybody. Assalamualaikum. Welcome everybody that's here. Inshallah, I am going to make sure all the settings are good. Assalamualaikum. Welcome everybody. This is Wadud Hassan from Mindfulness Matters, and we're going to be, mashallah, we're really excited to host today Dr. Carrie York, and she is from Al-Karam Institute. She's a really good friend of mine, mashallah, a great advisor, and she's somebody that, you really value because she's always there to help and guide you, mashallah.
Oh,
And I'm so grateful, Carrie, for all of your guidance always. And what Al-Karam Institute is about to do, right? And I'll let you talk about Al-Karam Institute. And but before I start, I just want to say that I was also honored by Carrie to actually co-author a little children's book that we did, and I'll drop a link here for everybody that's joining. It is called Maya and the Seven Limbs. So, Carrie, you want to talk a little bit about the book and also Al-Karam Institute, please?
yeah, sure. Bismillah. So the book we did actually quite a number of years ago.
Right.
So I was just thinking, before the call, like how I think we've known each other for 5 or 6 years probably. And I can't even recall if we knew each other before we did the book or while the book or because of the book.
Yeah, it was so like, people like you that are like, mashallah, doing such great work. I normally get in line to talk to them. You're one of the only ones that actually reached out to me and asked me, hey, I love what you're doing at Define and this whole emotional intelligence thing for kids, and tell me what you're doing. Remember?
Oh, no, I don't remember. That's the whole thing. That's why I'm asking. So yeah, no, the Maya and the Seven Limbs book, that was a lot of fun to do, but that was completed already quite a number of years ago. And that was our children's virtue and character development book. That is a free ebook. You can access the entire book for free on the Al-Karam Institute website, which is alkaraminstitute.org. So feel free to use that and share it widely. In terms of the Al-Karam Institute, so the Al-Karam Institute, our mission is to advance Islamic psychology to benefit society and improve lives. Our longer term vision is to become the first Muslim graduate school of psychology in the United States. So it's our longer term goal, but we've been around already for almost 5 years. And we are already offering this. We're in the second. We're finishing the second year of our Islamic psychology program. So we offer an Islamic psychology program. It's the first and only Islamic psychology program in the United States. And so we're finishing the second year of that, inshallah, starting the third year this coming fall. And our plan is to apply for graduate school status, inshallah, if God's plan. We should be applying for that graduate school status later this year, by the end of the year. And if we're able to get it, we should be offering the first and only master's degree in Islamic psychology starting next fall 2024. So those are our plans. Let's see if they're in alignment with Allah's plans. But and then of course, we hope to offer other degrees after that, both at the master's and doctoral level, both clinical and non-clinical degrees. So that's kind of.
Alhamdulillah. I'm eagerly waiting. I think there's a lot of people that can benefit. And, I have had this conversation with you about, that I wanted to do my own PhD, and then what should I focus on and how to find this really important niche of Islamic psychology. So tell our audience a little bit about what is Islamic psychology? What is psychology versus Islamic psychology? You've done, a book around Islamically integrated psychotherapy. And what is that? And how is that all related to mental health and mental well-being and, cultivating our best self as Muslims?
That's a lot
Big
of
question.
questions. That's like 5, 6, 7, 8 questions all in a row.
We'll break it down.
So I think the first and the biggest question, and I've talked about this before and I've published articles on this. what is Islamic psychology? Because different people have a different idea in mind when you say the term Islamic psychology. And, I think I have a couple of YouTube videos out there, or talks, or like I said, articles or whatever, where I kind of deal with this in detail. But, some I think it's, talking about human ontology, or the works of the early Muslim scholars, or Islamically integrated psychotherapy. So different people have different ideas in terms of what that might mean. And I think, there's room for all of that, but really the way I understand it, or the way we understand it at the Al-Karam Institute within a sort of contemporary 21st century context, is that it's psychology, but it's rooted in the philosophical assumptions of the Islamic tradition. So you have roots of the discipline and you have branches. The roots are things like epistemology. How do we know what we know? Human ontology. Who are we first and foremost? I mean, if we're talking about the field of psychology, there are different theories within the field of psychology. There's not just one theory. There's a lot of different theories about who are we. And then once you have that, then there's different ideas about, what psychology is, and what the whole, what you're really trying to do. So in terms of the roots of Islamic psychology, it's, starting from what Allah tells us about the nature of the world and the universe and the cosmos that he created, including us, that he exists. And these philosophical principles are the starting point for Islamic psychology. And then when we look at the branches, then we can think about how we can build a science of psychology that's relevant today, but one that is rooted in those principles. And so there can be great variety in terms of what Islamic psychology scholarship, research, and application can look like, because psychology is also a huge field. And so, when I talk about how Islam and psychology engage with each other, depending on what you're doing, the permutations of that kind of engagement can have a lot of different, have great variety. So for anybody interested in more, like I said, I've written some articles and some lectures and some talks on that, because it is a topic. I mean, when we're talking about defining things, it is something that requires attention and care and deep thought, and is, that's the starting point, is defining your terms. So I would encourage anybody who is interested in the field to really get clear about what it is that we're talking when we say Islamic psychology.
So let me bring the question down to me, everybody that's listening, me as a person, and cultivating my heart and cultivating my best self. What does that mean when I'm thinking about Islam and psychology, and what tools do I draw from that to cultivate myself? I'll talk about a few other scenarios, like the leader of a Muslim organization, right? Parents, teachers. I'll talk about those in a minute, but just as a person, as I'm listening, what does that mean? How do I relate to this?
Well, I think there's different levels, but I mean, somebody, as a Muslim, I have different tools that I can use depending on my need, depending on what it is that I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to cultivate my heart, that's what the whole science of Islamic spirituality is about, whether you call it tasawwuf or tazkiyah, or, there's different terms, but we have those solutions and those tools within the Islamic tradition in terms of cultivating your heart. Now, what happens is that is kind of inseparable from more mental or psychological things that we come up against while doing that purification process. And so then that might require, maybe approaches or tools that are kind of more thought of being within psychology, whether you're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy or some other kind of psychotherapy. But the thing is we shouldn't think that necessarily those what we call Western approaches are necessarily not inherently Islamic. You know what I mean? We have to be careful about dichotomizing that. And which I think a lot of people have a tendency to do, that we have the Islamic tradition over here and then we have the Western tradition over here. Well, a lot of times the Western tradition is components of it can be inherently Islamic, or there can be certain principles that are, when we talk about CBT, I mean, people talk about, Aaron Beck being a modern psychologist that founded certain things, but some of these principles are in the Islamic tradition. So I think we have to be careful about that. But nonetheless, for sake of language and ease, sometimes we tend to think of this over here and that over there. But you might need to pull tools from different domains in order to deal with whatever you as an individual heart or an individual soul is in most need of. Sometimes that might be just looking within an Islamic spirituality, or sometimes that might require something that's really just, psychotherapy, because there's maybe some trauma or some, wounds there that need to be dealt with. So it depends. There's not like a one size fits all kind of answer.
Yeah, but whatever tool you pull, I mean, those tools are coming from psychologists and researchers that studied the human being, right? It's that exploration that Allah says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ, that within you I have created these wonders that have you not looked. And they have looked and they have found, sometimes for whoever looks finds, right? And they have found something that is useful to us, and we're using some of that. But all of that could be integrated with that Islamic spirituality, right? That could be in addition or integrated. And how do we do that? And how do we use Islamic psychology or Islamic psychotherapy as a preventative tool, for example? You're talking about intervention when something happens, but what about as a preventative tool for mental health?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to what is your baseline? What do we need to do kind of like as a baseline? And I think that when you adhere, I think the practices that we have as Muslims, the spiritual practices that are sort of incumbent upon us, those are a good starting point. But then the other question is, what are you already doing on a regular basis so that you have that as part of your existing toolbox when crisis happens? Do you know what I mean? As opposed to waiting until crisis happens and then all of a sudden, frantically searching around like, oh, what kind of tools do we have to help me with this? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like, what, it's about developing a certain baseline as a part of like regular everyday life.
Right. This is really good. And in terms of, are there Islamic psychotherapy or Islamically integrated, psychotherapy tools that could be, are there validated research around tools that are Islamically integrated, right? Is there enough, what's going on in that field? And what can we learn from that evolving research? And what else do we need to know to validate this research that's coming up in that field, right? To help. And a lot of times what we're hearing is that, also something that I wanted to ask you was this therapy working for people, right? Like a lot of times when I'm talking to a lot of my students in the master class, and I'm just a mindfulness emotional intelligence coach. I'm just integrating Ghazali's work or Ibn Atta'Allah's work and, Islamic spirituality, part of that is Islamic psychology. That's integrated into that coaching model, right? More of it's a coaching model for developing your peak performance, your emotional productivity, and so on. And some of my students tell me that they have found more benefit in that than trying to do therapy. And I say, hey, we're not therapists here. If you have mental health, you need to go to a counselor, you need to go to a therapist. And after saying all of that, then I hear stories, right, about how they went, and something went completely the other way, or they didn't really get full benefit. And how do Muslims navigate that, right? And sometimes that connection also is missing between the therapy and maybe what they believe, and what is deep to their faith and their identity. How do we reconcile that, and any guidance there? Sorry, it's also I'm asking a lot of heavy questions today.
Well, it's also a lot of questions all in one. But in terms of this idea about, some people finding benefit, for example, maybe in what you're doing with mindfulness or meditation or whatever, and others, maybe going the route of psychotherapy, different things will work for different people depending on the issues that they're struggling with, the things that they're trying to develop in themselves. So again, it's not like one approach will work the same for everyone, depending on the needs of the particular person. But that said, when we talk about therapy, genuinely speaking, and more specifically psychotherapy, one of the things that we know that is the most, if somebody is going to have a success story with psychotherapy, usually the number one ingredient to why psychotherapy was successful or might be successful is the therapist-client fit. So if you take that idea that it's all about the connection you have with the therapist, sometimes, that can be applied in different in different areas. So, maybe mashallah, maybe some of your students are really feeling connected with you and what you're doing. And that in and of itself can be incredibly therapeutic, regardless of the tools that you're teaching them. Do you know what I mean? And if we even think about within an Islamic context, people connecting themselves to shuyukhs or imams or that that can be a very powerful connection, regardless of whatever it is that, they're doing. And so I think that can't be emphasized enough. And the same thing for psychotherapy. Sometimes just having, there have been books, and I have some books in my library talking about how, just having, if you're talking about within the context of psychotherapy, having a therapist listen to your struggles and your pain and just being a loving, witnessing, attentive presence in and of itself can be incredibly healing. And there's even books that talk about the neurological basis of that, about how your brain starts to heal when somebody just listens to you. And in fact, there's a quote, and I can't recall who said it, but it's being listened to is so close to being loved that sometimes people don't know the difference. So in other words, people's experience of just genuinely being heard and listened to, you can have the same feeling as if someone loves you, that you literally don't distinguish between when someone actually loves you or when someone, in this case, a therapist, is just genuinely listening to your story with care. So I think that there's a lot that can be said about that connection. Yeah,
it's beautiful. And, like the first pillar of our, masterclass we teach is heal in presence of God. And we talk about the healing presence of the prophet, and how the prophet says when he was listening to people, he would not just turn his face, but he would completely turn his heart, and he would really be present.
Yes.
And just practicing that one aspect, I think what you're just saying can really be.
And what is that presence? And that presence is exactly, you know this, and you could speak to this, but it's like, that's the whole Islamic meditation of when you talk about presence, hudur, right? This is where, you are stopping and God has more space to come into that, right? Whereas when you're not present, it's like all of your nafs, it's all of your mind. And do you see what I'm saying? So it's like that presence. That is the source that we're talking about. You get out of the way and let God just be there to heal that situation.
Wow. Hold on. Let me just write that down. When you are present, you make space for God to come in.
Well, yeah, yeah. Otherwise, you're just in the way. You are the,
when you get out of the way, then you make space for God.
Then it's just God, as opposed to you getting in the way of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's where I think, that's like the core of this whole Islamic psychology, right? That God-centered psychology about really.
But I would also just say as a follow-up to that in reality, God doesn't even need you to get out of the way to do his work.
He's there. You know, he's always present. He's always present. Yeah. So it's both. He's always present, but at the same time, you need to make that space for you to be present, right?
For you, not for him.
Not for him. Like Rumi and Ghazali both mentions, like God is present. Are you? Like
whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah. Are you veiled? It's not him that is veiled, but is it you? That's awesome. So so this is there's a lot, but in terms of what are some concrete steps, without having to go to a graduate school or without having to take a workshop or a master class or any of that? What are some simple tools that we as Muslims can use from our tradition or from Islamically integrated, kind of like psychology? I understand therapy is when you go into a counselor, but for psychology, what are some tools we can use on a regular basis to cultivate our mental health? And do you want to share even like one tool?
Yeah, well, we have them. We have them in our spiritual practices. I mean,
yeah.
But it's, we have them, in terms of our five daily prayers, the wudu that we take, our fasting, our dhikr, adhkar that we're doing. So, these are tools that are not unknown to people. These are part and parcel of everybody's, any just average Muslim has been exposed to such kinds of things, but it's a question of the question is, are you using them? Are you participating in them and practicing them? And if so, how present are you?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Because you can, I see, people take 30 seconds to pray dhuhr, it's like 1, 2, 3, right? So we're not talking about that, although there is a blessing even in that. Allah in his mercy even rewards you for that, mindless, quick, kind of just very outward bodily done. But that's the starting point. That's the starting point. So, you don't have to look anywhere besides that.
Anywhere
but
else.
It's
so
right.
Use the practices you have.
Right in our faces.
That's right. And sometimes the most valuable thing are already given to us, and it's about really unlocking that, right? And like when Musa alayhi salam asked about something very special, give me something very special, and Allah said, say la ilaha illallah, and he says everybody says it, and why should I? Is that like, can I have something special? Allah says if you put that on one side of the scale and heavens and the earth on the other side, that this will outweigh. So it's just unlocking the la ilaha illallah, right? Unlocking.
And I think the power comes with sincerity, ikhlas. Allah knows the human heart. He created us. He knows our heart, what's in our hearts more than we know ourselves. But I think sincerity is the key that unlocks everything, because you might not have knowledge, you might not know how to do this, you might be lacking this or lacking that, but if you have a sincere heart, Allah will open everything for you, everything that you need, and then some. The key to that is sincerity.
MashaAllah. Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. Alhamdulillah. That because Allah looks at your heart, right? Allah looks at your heart, and the heart being that center of. Okay, so tell me about as a leader of Muslim organizations. Like I have run quite a few projects, including schools, and how, as a school leader or a masjid leader or a nonprofit Muslim organization leader, what do we do in terms of what principles can we draw from, and how do we lead in a way that makes space or makes an environment to cultivate our best self, or our these tools from that we learn from our Islamic psychology? What do we pay attention to?
Well, I think, a lot of that has to do with the level of self-awareness that people in leadership
Yeah,
have.
that's
I mean,
right.
that's kind of the starting point. I mean, if you want to be an effective leader, and more specifically, an effective leader within an Islamic context, it starts with a level of self-awareness, because if you don't have that, you don't even know Allah. I mean, because what does Allah say? If you want to know your Lord, know yourself, or know, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like, if you don't even have like a base level of introspection, of a level of conscious awareness of who you are, why you do what you do, and sort of exploring what motivates you and what makes you tick.
Hmm.
You
So
know,
I'll stop you there. Sorry, I'm going to stop you there. That's a lot. That's a lot right there. So what you're saying is that if you're not self-aware as a leader, if you're
yeah,
not connected to your own intention, if
God
you're
help
not
us.
connected, if you're not connected to your intention, if you don't even know how to check your own ego, for
Yeah,
example, you're
yeah.
not going to be able to really lead or can make any connection to what Islamic psychology means for your organization. So you're saying that it starts with you as a leader to really understand those tools and connect yourself with those. That's amazing. So should there be a training requirement before somebody gets in a position of power or leadership? Should there be a requirement for Muslims to learn that? Because otherwise they might cause damage, right?
Well, yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, we hear about, people in leadership positions that cause harm to those that they lead, whether we're talking about in an Islamic context or just society in general. You
Just
can talk about
society in
any,
general. Yeah.
yeah, society in general. I mean, when you have unconscious people in leadership, those that follow them get harmed, right? But that, so I mean, in an ideal world, yeah, of course, it would be great to have, certain level of training for a leader in any position. But each organization, I guess, would make that assessment in terms of what they're, requiring in their leaders. They're going to make that on an individual organizational basis. But it also brings up the issue of those who are looking to put somebody in as a leader. They can have influence on that themselves when they have their own self-awareness, because then you get in the position of not turning responsibility about your own well-being into the hands of a leader, but it's kind of in terms of giving your power away, but kind of like bringing that back in and making good conscious decisions about what kind of leaders, whether you want to elect or hire or put into power or whatever it is. So it's kind of like this back and forth process where it requires a level of awareness in terms of the lay people as well as at the leadership level.
Yeah. I wish there was like a certification or a course or some type of standardization of like trainings that you need to know to really get into some of that with yourself before you become
Well, I mean, if you're talking about Islamic leadership in schools and and that sort of thing.
Masajid and nonprofits and in general, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you do have, like, for example, Islamic chaplaincy and stuff like that. But in terms of how deeply such kinds of programs go into training those in their program to develop self-awareness, I mean, I don't know. Certainly in our program, it's not just, we say this all the time, it's not just what you're being trained to do in our program, but who are you becoming, right? And I
Yeah.
really think that that's what higher education really needs to be about, this whole person education, where you're not just going and getting a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD so that you can get a job and do something, but who are
Right.
you becoming in that
Right.
process?
Yeah.
And
Not
but
what you do, but who you are.
who you are, but you have to have a program that approaches education from that perspective, so that the curriculum that is developed, it's not just designed to give people information, but that it develops this level of self-awareness. And that's what, that's the project that we're doing here at the Al-Karam Institute. But in terms of how other institutions or educational programs are doing that, that remains to be seen. I know that my PhD in psychology, and I studied transpersonal psychology, that's, it was all about whole person education. It was rooted in this same philosophy of what are we doing and who are we becoming in the process.
So then there is then the parallel to that for individuals, right? We have a lot of teachers and parents, in addition to leaders that are joining us here, leaders, coaches, entrepreneurs that are joining, but also their parents, their teachers. And how do we take the same principles you just mentioned for leaders for ourselves? What can we do as a parent, for example, right?
So now you're talking about bringing this consciousness, this conscious level awareness, what we were talking about in leadership roles, of bringing it within the leadership of your own life as parents. Yeah. It's a challenge. But, it's one that I raised 3 stepchildren, and I have one full, biological child who's now 12. And so, I deal with this all the time. So this is not something that's theoretical for me. It's something practical that I have to deal with all the time. And, again, me personally, it's always going back to Allah. It's always going back to Allah. Whatever the challenges are, it's having this level of faith where God can guide you, where He can guide your heart to deal with whatever issues you're dealing with within your own particular household and your own particular children, in a way that works for them. For me personally, I pray tahajjud, inshallah, every day. I try. I'm, kind of 99%, but there is, occasion if I'm traveling or something. But I'm telling you, waking up in the middle of the night and just bringing all of your problems, and that includes challenges that we have with our children and things that they're struggling from. When you do that in the middle of the night and you come with a sincere heart to Allah and you say, oh, Allah, I'm dealing with this problem with my child, and you pray for your child and you ask for guidance, the answer will come to you. Because if your heart is that connected to Allah, that's where the answer comes through. His answer to you, one of the ways that His answer comes to you is through your own heart and your own internal knowing. And so that will never fail you, but it's also something that you have to develop. You know what I mean? I mean, can you just like wake up one morning and pray once and get your answer? For sure, because Allah can do what He wants, right? But it's something, in my view, that also needs to be something that's more sustainable.
Cultivated. So that consistent routine. So I will break it down a little bit. What you just said, there's a lot there. But there's something, it's not just the face value, what you mentioned, just wake up for tahajjud. It's more about that, making that space where you are consistently, regularly cultivating a connection between you and God. And that consistent cultivation, as we know from all of the research that's showing up in, mindfulness and consciousness, and why they're benefiting people, why so many people are trying those things, is because regular practice, it rewires our brain, and from a Muslim perspective, it rewires our heart and soul. And we're able to connect and just develop that sense of connection to God, which helps us hopefully to also be more self-aware, right?
Yes. And I think that regular practice also shows your faithfulness to Him. It shows your worthiness and your faithfulness and your commitment to Him. And that's when the blessings come. The answers to your prayers and to your problems and to your questions. So for parenting, I would say that that's one very, those spiritual practices, very powerful tool. And then of course, there are, there's also nothing wrong with, I always say that, religion and spirituality are not cure-alls for everything. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, attending a parenting class or picking up a parenting book from Barnes and Noble or Amazon or whatever, and reading through some of these, experts that have some practical. There's even a book, I think it's called Positive Parenting parenting in the Muslim home or something like that. And there's even been a number of books written about, parenting within an Islamic context. There's nothing wrong with that, with looking for, towards that as tools as well. So it's not just pray away everything or
and that's it. Yeah.
There's different approaches, but again,
learning
it comes back.
Learning the evidence-based models in any field or any role that you're in, and looking at the latest tools and evidence-based, guidance around that role, but connecting that to also that the center of our iman and our faith to channel that also with God.
Yes. And again, it's your, sincerity. When you sincerely go to Allah and present all of your things that you need help on, He will respond. And you can have hope in that.
Yeah, no, this is beautiful. So, inshallah, I know we're already over our 30 minutes mark, and I want to ask you, somebody asked a question. I've asked, like, on my Instagram stories, I asked, like, does anybody have any questions? Someone asked that, what is for Muslims that sometimes feel a little bit out of place in society because, we don't see a God-centered conversation out in the world, right? Or a faith-centered conversation. And sometimes Muslims end up, feeling like this question was about integrating the society in a way that we start to forget our faith in God. And what is a seamless way a Muslim can be connected to the greater society while also being truthful to their faith? And this was a question that came in, so I'm not sure exactly how to clarify that more, but I just wanted to share it for the sake of honoring that question.
Yeah. Well, I understand that to be the question of, like, how do you basically kind of be a Muslim in a Western, or specifically in an American context, without compromising your values. What I would say is that, one, there's different ways to do that. There's not a one size fits all way to do that, but that, two, I was just going to say something, I forgot, I lost my train of thought, that, there are others struggling with the same issue. There are other people of, different faith traditions that might also have, the same criticism when we look to, what is supposed to be, we have separation of church and state, right? So there are Christians that are committed to their tradition that are also not happy about that. So I would say, one, you've got there, people can, have to negotiate dual identity in different ways, but that, two, realize that it's not just you, that there's others that are also negotiating that. And then, three, I would say, when we think about Islam, one of the highest principles that we, that's part of who we are as Muslims is tawheed. And I think having this attitude or internal orientation of tawheed or unity within an American context is to ask yourself the question, what do I focus on? Do I focus on the 3% about Islam that is, like, different than Christianity? Because if we talk about, the predominant religion in America being Christianity, and then we look at Christianity and Islam, and there's a lot of similarities, do you want to focus on the few percent that's different and then feel like you're this ostracized person over in the corner? I'm so different. Or do you want to look for unity? Do you want to look for the connection? Do you want to look for the similarity of what you have in common with others? Different people answer that question differently, but I think to really live Islam within this context and to really embody the peace that is supposed to come along with following this tradition, that there's no other way but to approach it from this tawhidic perspective, which is connection and unity with others despite differences, yes, there are some differences, but that's not our focus. Our focus is connection and unity.
Yeah, how do we connect? Like with Muslims, of course, this beautiful gift of connection through Iman, right? But like I've also heard from my spiritual teachers about connecting to non-Muslims or people that are not sharing the same faith, with that connection of humanity, that connection of character and humanity and service.
Or even just belief in that God created this world and he exists and we're going back to him when we're done. I mean, if you talk about just the Abrahamic faiths of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, we all agree on that. God created the world. He created us. He's there. He's helping us and we're returning to him. Right. I mean, that's kind of like that's life in general, right?
Yeah.
So, look to that connection and commonality that you have with others. And I think that, you'll be able to integrate, in it. But again, everybody has their own, differences too. I realize, and I say that, I try to say that with humility, because I realize that people have a different experience who might be like immigrants or, might wear hijab or anything. And I feel sometimes that I'm not necessarily the best person to speak to that, because I'm a white American. I was born and raised here. My family has been, I'm not identifiably Muslim. And so, I probably don't have to deal with some of the things that maybe a migrant, Muslim hijab wearing person of color might experience. And so I say that, with humility, acknowledging my own kind of, issues that I don't have to deal with that others might. So I just want to
yes. So what is your parting message for everybody that's listening? Any parting message before we end?
Parting messages. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.
Right. Always go back to that unity, right? Beautiful. I'm just going to share a few of my takeaways for everyone that was here or that's joining late. We talked about, Carrie, Dr. Carrie York's work at Al-Karam Institute, and Al-Karam Institute is working on becoming one of the first, graduate Islamic psychology program in the U.S. Inshallah, accredited program. We're making dua for that. May Allah grant a lot of tawfiq. We talked about Carrie's book on Islamic psychotherapy. We talked about a book that we co-authored, a children's book a few years ago on Maya and the Seven Limbs, about Imam Ghazali's model of rectifying our limbs and our deeds. And then we talked about our importance of seeking the evidence-based models of therapy, and as Muslims looking out for the latest research that's beneficial for us, going to the experts. And then we also talked about the importance of Islamic psychology being at the center of who we are and what is our connection to God, and cultivating that the importance of healing presence when we're listening to someone, going to someone that would listen to us, and also that healing presence in the relationship between us and God, making that space every day, even if you're not able to wake up for tahajjud, which is the best. If you have any other time of the day that you are able to have that regular cultivation of the relationship and space between you and God, to build that connection and self-awareness, and the importance of self-awareness as a leader, that if we're not aware of our intentions, our heart, our sincerity, who we are, and not just what we do, but who we are. Right, Carrie? I think I'm trying to kind of capture some of the key points that you've mentioned here. That can become a tool for healing and tool for growth for all of us.
Beautiful summary. And may all that we discussed today, may it inshallah be of benefit to whoever's listening, inshallah.
Ameen. May Allah grant us tawfiq to practice and tawfiq to seek out the best in every way, to cultivate our best self wherever we are and whatever roles we have, and give us the tools as a community to cultivate our spiritual health, our mental health, our physical health, in every way that we are striving to make ourselves better. May Allah grant us tawfiq and continuous forward movement, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Carrie, for being here. May Allah bless you.
Wonderful to speak to you as always.
Assalamu alaikum.